Well, it is now 3 o'clock, which means it is time to start another Vinimark webinar. And today we're here to discuss the changing face of digital media. Now, in case you were wondering, today is not about the importance of e-commerce. That ship has sailed. There are no more prizes for mere participation. Today is about learning how to develop smart brand strategy in order to be able to beat out the competition and connect with new customers, rather than being drowned out by all the white noise in this incredibly crowded digital space. So we're going to cover some important but oft overlooked best practices in online communication, and we're going to discuss the importance of using data properly in order to understand consumer behavior. Now, to help us on our way, we have an amazing panel that consists first of the international marketing consultant Polly Hammond, who is also the founder of fiveforests.com. It's an agency that builds profitable food, wine, and travel brands. Then we have Peter van Niekerk, the founder of Vintelligence, which is a South African-based agency specializing in market research and data analysis for the wine industry. And finally, we have Mike Ratcliffe, the proprietor of the luxury wine brand Villefontaine Wines, which was recently dubbed the world's best red wine producer by the IWSC. So I wanted to welcome you all and thank you for your time today. And then I wanted to kick off with you, Polly, with quite a basic question. It almost seems ridiculously foundational, but I think it's quite important to help us frame the conversation before it goes ahead. So I want to ask, when we talk about digital media and digital marketing, what are the categories that this includes?
So you sent this question through in the early brief, and I've been pondering it because even if I just start a list, I'm going to forget some things, right? So right off the bat, we know that I'm going to leave things out, but probably the best way to describe it is what I call IRL, so in real life, and URL, which is online. Anything that we do person to person that can carry our tone and our voice, that allows us to leverage everything that we know about just being civilized, making friends, and inference. That is our analog marketing space. And everything that relies on the internet, on virtual, on the cloud, I was thinking even something like SMS fits in, where we lose that natural or normal human connection, and we're relying on these channels nowadays to proxy for us. Those are the digital spaces. And it's actually that momentary loss of the us to them in real life that makes the digital spaces more challenging. How's
Great.
that?
So I mean, so there is a long list of them. Maybe a better way of asking the question is, what are the ones that are less obvious and that often get overlooked?
Right. So, okay, to go through the list in a really practical sense, right? We've got obviously social media, although I think that a lot of people perceive digital marketing as social media marketing. So that's a big issue to deal with. But you've got your website, but you've got things like all of your Google properties. So that could be anything from Google My Business through to how you're advertising. It can be things like Yelp, and it can be so Vivino or wine tour apps, or any of those spaces fall into the digital marketing. I think the ones that we notice people tend to forget about the most are the ones that other people control. So in a lot of instances, that's directories, it's SEO, it's citations, which is a kind of an SEO and a local marketing thing. It's actually Googling yourself, so that we have these things that we own and we think that we control in our space, such as social media. That's fine. But really the ones that tend to create the problems for brands are the ones that we don't ever think about, we don't know to even search for. And most of us don't shop our own spaces or Google ourselves.
So it seems to straddle the line between the two, but would you consider something like a monthly newsletter or emails to be digital marketing?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. Your email marketing, SMS marketing these days, virtual events, kiosks, all of those spaces. I mean, like literally the list just goes on and on. So here's the best way to describe it. If it involves the internet, for want of a better word, and wine, it's part of your digital marketing. They're the ones that we own. They're the ones that we earn. They're the ones that we pay for. So another great example are part of our digital marketing are all of the reviews that we get. The accolades that Mike receives are absolutely a portion of his digital marketing and something that he needs to, and he does a great job at this. So it's nice to be able to use him as an example, that he needs to recognize, leverage, reach out to, and really just utilize in as many ways as possible, because marketing, even digital marketing, costs money. The samples cost money, the relationships cost money, the travel that we used to be able to do cost money. All of this that we're surrounded by in terms of tech, our Zooms, our cameras, our mics, all of it costs money, and it's all part of a marketing budget.
I love that little point you made about Googling yourself, because if we're doing a presentation or even just going out to a party or to be in front of people, we probably have a little check in the mirror before we go out. And yet when it comes to the way we communicate digitally, we sometimes forget to be self-conscious, I guess, and that can lead to poor communication. But yeah.
I want to talk about that. Part of the issue is we're being asked to do a lot, right? And that's a challenge. If you ask me to go out tomorrow, I've got shelves of amazing winemaking books. If you ask me to go out and make wine, I'm screwed. I don't know how to do that. So this notion that we can be excellent at everything is probably one of the biggest challenges that businesses are facing in a digital age.
So I imagine we're probably going to talk about a little bit later about the services that are probably best suited to be outsourced, because I think even that is something we can open a whole can of worms there about what are the things that should be outsourced because they are generally done quite badly. And hopefully we can circle back to that a little. But I wanted to find out from you, and I know you get to work with a bunch of different brands in not just in wine. I thought it'd be interesting for wine producers to get a little look through your eyes into some of those other industries where wine has a reputation for sometimes being a little backwards. What are some of the best practices or tips and tricks that you see some of your other clients playing out in their industry that we're not really adopting in the wine industry?
Oh, I'm going to get in trouble with the winemakers on this one. The biggest issue that I see that we have in wine is that we are so incredibly in love with our product that it's really hard for us to detach that emotional connection to see it from the perspective of our market, whether it's a big global broad market, whether it's, small, local, guest, tourism, production, whatever it may be. And I've worked with all sorts of different businesses over the years. And I just find that because of the nature that combines the agriculture with the fineness of it and the heritage and just the legacy of what we produce, that we can get really wrapped up in all of that meaning and not see that the person on the other end of whatever the marketing may be, they're new to all of this, or they're not as interested as we are, or no matter how much we educate them, they really just want to know what it tastes like.
I suppose that's quite tricky to unwrap, because when you talk about being in love with your product, part of that expresses itself as passion, right? And we're told that consumers are drawn to passion and authenticity and integrity. So it's tricky to, try and roll that back. Can you think of some examples where perhaps passion might work in person, but you have to take a different approach in order to paint that picture digitally?
Yeah, I'm going to give you one. Happens all the time in wine. If you're trying to onboard someone who's new to your brand, they don't care about your soil. It doesn't matter how passionate we are about terroir, about the decisions that we've made. They have one question in the beginning. Are they going to like what they pay for? And yes, I understand we can prime it by telling them stories, but if they don't like, or if they can't begin to imagine what our wine tastes like, it's really hard to get the sell. And I see that all the time, for instance, in wine digital marketing, where we have producers who write the most remarkable tasting notes that nowhere in it helps the audience No. Well, what can I expect this to taste like? So it's really like getting down to fundamentals. Know, like, trust. We have to know that you exist. We have to like something about your brand, and we have to trust that whatever you're saying to us is going to play out effectively in our lives. And these are not, that's the whole thing. When we talk about digital marketing, it's just marketing. It's just marketing. There's no difference between the marketing that sold things in the 1960s and the marketing that sells now, except that we're doing it through proxy channels.
Right. Well, Mike, I wondered if you could maybe just chime in there on that topic. You've got two very different brands, and I know we're going to talk about them more later. But what are your thoughts on Polly's assertion that the first and foremost thing is about communicating taste up front? Because I feel like perhaps you've done something a little different when you've communicated a brand like Seriously Old Dirt.
Yeah, I think every word that came out of Polly's mouth, I was kind of nodding, going, yes, this lady kind of knows what she's talking about. I think the reality is that consumers, contrary to popular belief, actually like to be marketed to. A softer term could be they like to be spoken to. So you just need to make sure that you're saying to them what it is that they want to hear, and that's going to be how you define good marketing. I also think that going back to basics is very, very clear. One of my key understandings of specifically wine marketing is that it's not that complicated. You know, Polly nailed it also by saying, you know, people want to know what it tastes like. What is the experience that they're going to have? How's it going to make them feel? Often when I'm speaking to my team, we have these deep, in-depth conversations, and then I cut right through the middle of it and I say, who cares? Question mark. I write it on the board. And then we have a long discussion about why would anybody care what it is that we're saying? So I do agree with that. And just also picking up on one of Polly's points is this is digital wine marketing, even though the world has changed, is just wine marketing using a different channel, a different platform, using the internet and using all the new channels that exist, but they're all on the internet. But the reality is you still need a strategy. The channels have changed, but your message should not have changed. It's just a different place to communicate it.
Well, you were saying earlier that you got to tell customers what they want to hear. And I think, Polly, if I can jump back to you, both of you have talked about being customer centric in your strategies in one way or another. And when we're talking about this, one of the terms that seems to pop up a lot is that of segmentation. In essence, slicing up your customer base into different sections. But for perhaps a small producer who either doesn't have a huge database or is starting from scratch, how do they know which way is the best way to slice things? Polly, can you speak to that point?
Yeah, so there are a lot of issues involved in this one question. And I will admit that segmentation without any kind of historic data is one of the biggest challenges that we face, because you have to treat it kind of like the scientific process. So let's say that you're starting from scratch, or you've got no historic data, or the day comes that we don't have any data. One, we're very, very lucky that for those of us who have cellar doors and tasting rooms, we have these wonderful back and forth analog communications that people love to tell us. Why are they here? What matters to them about wine? So some of it is, whether we're working in analog or digital, we need to listen to our people. Like, that's so important. Active listening. And I often say that a marketer is the consumer advocate in the room. That is our job, right? Is to just like channel their voices. But then how do you practically do it? One, you're going to give yourself a chance to fail. Like, give yourself grace, because you can't just set it and forget it. You're going to go out with a hypothesis based on everything that you believe about the different kinds of personas, the different kind of people who interact with your brand. And then you're going to monitor it. And again, that's why qualitative data, and I know that we're going to jump to this with Peter, qualitative data is very important. It does need to be backed and measured by quantitative data as you're working through this understanding of, have I made the right decisions? And the other thing that's super important is they change. people change. We grow up. Like, we're living in this world where we've got, what is it, the constellations, genomes, like we've got like these 6 people that the wine world has relied on in years, but those people don't exist anymore. And even in terms of demographics, we're looking at the possibility of becoming, Google says we're marketing to an audience of 1. And how do we do that as a business? How do we do that when we don't have resources? How do we do that when we don't have data, when we don't understand our channels, when we don't know even how to get into our reporting? So that's why I say there's a lot that's going on here. The first thing is give yourself permission to fail and learn. The second thing is understand what data is important and make certain that you're getting that data from the very beginning. And the third thing is don't just leave it and say, right, I've got whatever it is, segments, automations, persona, whatever. Revisit it. Grow with your people. Your brand grows too.
I enjoyed what you said about being willing to fail. The notion of coming up with what I guess is a guess. And if it's wrong, that's not a failure. That means that you've learned something. It's like Edison and his 99 ways not to make a light bulb. I think that's something perhaps a lot of people are afraid to do. So Peter, can I bring you into the conversation here? Well, I hope I can. Otherwise, we're going to have a long silent patch. But last time we chatted, we were mentioning exactly this sort of thing. Well, Polly talked about listening, but you also were asserting that actually how you look at the data or what you hear can affect what it tells you. So when you're sitting with a wine producer who, let's say, does have historical data, how do you help them decide which lens they're supposed to do in order to look at the data in a way that will yield results?
Jono, yeah, I think for me, the first sort of exciting point today is that, let's all just be aware, let's fail forward. I don't think there's the silver bullet that's going to be applicable to everyone and each individual. So I think let's just be open to that. And I think totally, Polly, what people say they do in qualitative data and what they actually do sometimes differs significantly. So, third-party suppliers, like in our case of data, is definitely an opportunity to learn more. But I think you've got to start to preach to the converted. Who are the people visiting your farm? Who's already buying your product? And I think what data can you get out of that? And totally, once again, Mike, I mean, people actually enjoy engagement. If they want to come to your farm, they're actually paying money to get to you to listen. And, if you can take that opportunity to listen a bit more, in a data perspective, I think it's almost like slicing an onion through, start at the core and then build out layer for layer. Take what you have, who's already buying from you. If you don't have any data, just try and start. I mean, even if you just have a head count of visits on the farm. I'm always surprised of how little people actually can give that stat when you sit in the office. But I think it's take ownership. You can tell the story the best, and start with the people actually already listening. They're actually much closer than what you think.
So, Mike, you said, if someone has bothered to come all the way to your wine estate or to your tasting center, I think the way you worded it is, what kind of an idiot leaves without getting their contact details? I thought that was such a delightfully simple approach.
That might be one of the best take-homes of the whole day today, and Peter nailed it, and you've just reiterated it, is that databases don't build themselves. You've got to, it's an active process. You can't just have a database. You need to build it and collect it. You need to be disciplined, and you need to consistently add to it and make sure that the people that are there want to be there and that you're not irritating them. These things don't just happen.
So Peter, maybe an offshoot of what the question I was asking you the first time was, for example, if you do have access to an amazing database, and I know that's exactly what you do, is work with some fairly decent quantitative data, but you can divide this data, or you can look at it from a geographical perspective, or you can divide it from an age perspective, or even a gender perspective. So Peter, what I'm asking is, how do producers who have bothered to build their database, how can they start to make smart hypotheses? Sure, they might be wrong, but how do they at least begin to make smart guesses rather than just random guesses?
Yeah, look, Jono, I think totally, the start would be, not all, we are all individuals. So, you want to go down to a granular level as far as applicable as practically possible. Out of our 40,000 sort of consumers who have completed our surveys in the last 2 years, it's incredible to see what you can do out of it. But I always want to take a step back and start with what's the producer's story, what is his brand story. I think the days are long gone where we want to produce a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc Chenin and maybe do a Malbec because that's interesting, as an example. I think focus is very important for me, and once you take ownership of that story, it's almost, that's the first start to then look at how you want to slice and dice it. Otherwise you're going to do a shotgun approach, you're going to work in averages, you're going to inevitably bore a lot of consumers. But yes, once again, I think that already the people visiting your farm, you have people buying from your wine club, through your wine club, that said, we want to engage. And I mean, you can track what they're buying, and just making it personal in engagement is just going to be such a helpful tool going forward. But to give a little example, I mean, if we look at age in our data set, younger consumers are more influenced by celebrities and influencers than Facebook engagement, as an example. And I mean, I expected social media would be the end all, and I think this goes to Polly's point. We're doing the same thing, we're just using different media and forms of doing it. The core of it all is pretty much the same than 40 years ago. So I think we mustn't see this as an option. I think it's just making our life easier.
But I think it's also true to say that perhaps 50 years ago, it would have taken you far longer to amass 40,000 people's details, right, or their information. So I know that you've been sitting on some observations that you actually found to be counterintuitive. When we think about what we collectively know about the wine consumer, we may have a lot of ideas that are just plain wrong. I wondered if you could perhaps share a few, just a little bit, little anecdotes where our understanding of what we think about wine and how people engage with it actually turned out to be completely incorrect.
Yes, yeah, John, I think 40 years ago, people didn't look on their phones the whole time, so it was, I think, possibly a bit easier to engage face to face. But yeah, the reality is, John, I think, as soon as you think you can predict, and I think that's always the benefit about the reality we live in, is that artificial intelligence is actually, that's possibly sometimes just missing the plot completely. But I mean, one or two things we've put on the lens of wine journey instead of household income or age or gender as a sort of lens for our webinar in a month's time, and that basically just showed some interesting insights. People that haven't consumed the category for more than 5 years use price as a gauge for quality. And then people engaged in the category using or consuming wine for more than 10 years, actually they buy more, but they on average pay less, which was a bit counterintuitive. Obviously there's a lot of complexities around it, but I think it's interesting once you unpack your layers. I think the reality is, if you just get to a point where you have a database, you can actually look at it in so many ways to sort of unpack your strategy going forward. So I just think let's just be honest, to put a message out there for everyone is very difficult, but I always just start. I mean, even on the most basics, email address or cell phone number, just start getting that, and work from there. And you don't need massively expensive software to manage this. I think a system is only as good as the people involved and the data being pushed into it.
Sure. So in the interest of keeping things practical, if I was a skeptical young wine producer, desperate to sell my wine, but unsure if I wanted to, say, invest with something like Vintelligence, do you have one anecdote that you can share with us where perhaps you helped a client use a small data insight that in fact yielded a big result?
Yes, I think you don't want to talk too much out of the house, but I think the reality for us is sometimes just I want to take a step back, and I'm probably going to look more at an industry level. I think we're fantastic at selling to the converted and the look and feel of the industry, and we totally not engaging on a level where there's a lot of opportunities. But I think the reality for us a lot of the times is price point realities. I don't think, one of our colleagues on our board always says, if South Africans actually sell wine at cellar-door prices below 100 Rand a bottle, they're crazy. So, I mean, even just that in terms of pricing strategy, I think there's a big part of the market that is totally open to sweeter styled wines that are a bit more expensive, maybe a stepping stone from cheap and cheerful bag and boxes to a more serious but maybe a bit more sweeter but still a dried styled wine. We can totally see there's a big demand in that side. But I think it's quite a broad answer for a lot of them. I think I'll almost jump that back to the expert Mike, but I think it's really sitting down and just having a conversation, and sometimes the answer is actually a lot closer than what you think. You don't need fancy consultants. It's just introspection of what you're already doing and looking holistically at your business in that sense and consumers.
Although fancy consultants are very important, I'm sure. So, Mike, I mean, maybe then, if you don't mind, I want to jump across to you, because in one sense, Polly and Peter are consultants. They're doing the job, but you are the producer, and you've worked with 3 of South Africa's most recognizable wine brands, through Warwick, through Villafonte, through Seriously Old Dirt. And from what I can tell, you've always prioritized the use of data from very early on. So I'm just wondering, are you able to perhaps just share a memory that really opens up for guys who aren't necessarily convinced, where it just shows, look, we did this was the result, this is why I believe in data? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can give a very concise, very clear answer, and it stuck with me all these years. It was the discovery that once you have the data, your ability to slice it, redirect it, and to channel that your message into that data is supremely powerful. And to give you a very simple anecdote, lookalike audiences, it's completely blown my mind, and it's still relevant to this day, where if you have a database of, let's say, 500 people that are verified, that have actually been to your winery, visited your tasting room, possibly even bought something, at a minimum, you should have collected their email address and phone number, preferably where they live. But most of the social media platforms, you can feed that information in and ask Facebook or Instagram, for example, to deliver you a similar audience of perhaps 10,000 or 100,000 people that share similar characteristics. And lookalike audiences has always been a game changer. It's probably the most powerful use of early AI in social media. And so when you think that just getting 10 people on a weekend to fill in a form and join your database isn't powerful, it can be leveraged and it can be compounded. And that was probably a very early learning from my side. And I've stuck with it in the sense that within our company, we have a very strong discipline about continually feeding information into the database.
Well, I love that point about just 10 each weekend, because there is a sense that a database is this thing that you have to buy for it to be meaningful. But as you said, databases don't build themselves. And even the smallest of producers can begin by collecting emails each weekend or each little busy patch, as you say, 10 per weekend. And I think that's really helpful to help people dismantle this nebulous idea of a cloud of data that's going to solve all your problems. So, but Mike, keeping practical, right? You are currently working with 2 very different brands, even though they are connected. There's Villafonte and there's Seriously Old Dirt. And I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit about strategy. And I know Polly mentioned it earlier, and you also mentioned it, but it's one thing to have this big lump of data. It's another thing to know what you're trying to achieve. Can you talk to that?
Absolutely. I mean, going back to the topic of this webinar, which is the changing face of digital wine marketing, some things change and some things stay the same. And digital wine marketing can be very bad if your message is not good. So you need to really understand your strategy. And I would like to take that down to brand personality. What is the personality of your brand? Why would people be interested? What are the keywords around your brand? And digital wine marketing is merely a tool to explain that. to get it out there. But you've got to start by getting your message right. And certainly we've spent hours and days and weeks and months and years debating internally what is our brand personality. Villafonte is, we take things pretty seriously. It is a serious brand making serious wine. Often for people that are slightly geeky, and within that brand voice, there are certain words that you need to use to get out there. Words like allocation, limited, things like that. And obviously quality parameters. People know that it's going to not disappoint them. And so that's the one brand personality. And Seriously I'll Do It, which is definitely, we actually have defined it as a more playful brand. We call it a fighting brand, which we're not scared to trade, to give people a good deal if they buy a case instead of half a case. And we're ready to play. So we also think of it as an explorer brand. And what that means is that the voice that goes out into our digital wine marketing for each of those brands is a different voice. Now you could also, play with that. Perhaps Seriously I'll Do It's more appropriate for TikTok and WeChat and Instagram, whereas Seriously I'll Do It, could be better with a newsletter and Facebook. Villafonte might be better with a Facebook and a newsletter channel. But I think the first step is to understand your brand personality and then build a strategy based on that. And I think I've said it twice today. Polly's already said it. If you don't have a strategy, if you don't think about what you're doing, digital marketing is just a big fat mess. You can get lost very quickly.
Polly, I wondered if you could talk perhaps about some examples of where you've had customers who haven't understood who their customers are. And I think that's quite important, because you're talking about keywords and brand, but we also said earlier that you want to say what your customers want to hear, or you want to speak to them. Can you talk a little bit about how producers can discover that?
I can, but before I do that, because that kind of falls into what is questionably manipulation, and I want to be able to answer that question as well. First, I've always looked at Mike's brands, right? Mike knows what those brands are. He controls those brands. If you follow the communication for either of those two brands online, like, they are very, very grounded in what they stand for. I think that that's the first thing that we have to understand. And sometimes that can be quite difficult when we're working in a multi-channel system where we've got, part of those systems where they want us to, can we tweak the label this? Can we do something that? Can we message something here? Like, we have a lot of inputs that are asking us to adapt our brand to fit someone else's needs. So really owning what we stand for is the core of then being able to answer your question. So if we know what we stand for, and this is just like normal human behavior, then we know what kind of people are going to positively engage with our brand. We know what we have to, as Mike says, what we have to message to them. And in doing that, who is going to respond? So, examples of brands that have done it well and haven't done it well, without saying who any of those brands are. I think that what we saw, the best example is over the course of 2020 and 2021, we had a lot of brands who'd never gone through this process of any kind of foundation for their marketing or their strategy. And so they were just taking this real expensive shotgun approach to, holy shit, we have to solve the problems. We can't sell through our normal channels. So we're going to be on TikTok, and we're going to try Snapchat, and we're going to be on Instagram, and we're going to send out emails if we have a database, God willing. And we need a website, but we have no idea what we're going to say on a website. And so what you end up with is a costly, demoralizing mess, because you don't know where your people are. So you can't invest the limited resources that we have to actually be on those channels. And again, this ties into what Mike was saying about, some people are going to love one channel, some people are going to love another. And it really ties into our price point. It ties into our brand messaging. So I think without, being too granular about it, the broad answer is we see these brands who don't know who their people are all the time, wasting money and losing the will to ever do it again because they can't make sound, informed decisions around where to spend time, money, and effort.
And that comes back to your point, Mike, about strategy. I think perhaps one of the other mistakes that small producers make is that just because they can reach 1 billion people doesn't necessarily mean that they should. I'm sorry, Mike, did you want to say something there?
No, carry on.
So just because they can reach that massive audience doesn't necessarily mean that they should. And you think of some of the biggest tech businesses around today, a lot of them conquered markets in very small chunks at a time. You know, an Uber would do one part of a city at a time and conquer that, and only then did they move on to the next section. And I think perhaps when we move on to digital and we think the internet is the world and we can reach whoever we want to, it's sometimes too much. So Peter, when you and I chatted the other day, you were talking about how some of your clients you advise them to hone in on small areas, even small geographical areas. Even though we're dealing with the internet, you still focus on small geographical areas in order to get success there. Can you tell us a little bit more about your insights into this?
Yeah, I think, Jono, the big thing for me, and that's always popping up, is the shotgun approach. I think it's be more specific, and I think smaller is better in this way. And I'm saying smaller in the sense that be precise what conversation you're having with what person and what preference do they have. And once again, be open to failure. You know, it's not going to be easy identifying that for a few individuals. But I think for me, I just take myself personally, if Discovery calls me again for life insurance, I'm probably going to call them back and say, please just, you know, I'm never going to be interested. So, and that's nothing against Discovery. I think they've got a great call center. But it's the reality is people don't want to be averaged out. You know, if you're not going to do the effort to personalize engagement, I'm not going to read your email. I'm not going to look at your wonderful sorting table in the cellar. But if you maybe call me and ask me, Peter, I see you ordered Sauvignon Blanc a month ago, but you haven't ordered this month, then I'm engaged and I'm going to listen, and I'm probably going to feel bad that I didn't buy again, and I'll probably buy. But it's just, hi, Peter, we see that you didn't buy last month. And that's something that has worked for one or two clients. Possibly for a bigger brand, that's going to be quite difficult. But once again, I think it's actually very empowering to realize you don't need to be everything for everyone. Once again, preach to the converted. They're already listening. They're actually paying money to get to you. They're buying your product. Start with them and fail with them, you know, and 9 out of 10 times new consumers just they just want to be sure it's not going to be crap, you know. So but the ones that are already engaged, I think they'll listen to them. They'll probably guide you a bit more in that context.
Holly, you had something you wanted to say?
I did. So I'm not in any way debating the idea of good, targeted, segmented marketing, but I do want to say that one of the issues we have in marketing, and if we're talking about pitfalls, is that we don't have clearly defined goals happening. So again, it comes back to strategy. Understand what you're trying to accomplish. And the reason for this is a great method, if you're trying to build brand awareness, and this is going to get into some practical stuff, is that you can actually run very low budget brand lift ads that go out to huge markets. And you know that the goals and the metrics are actually to embed your product in their brain. It's the digital version of TV ads, you know, that ran all of the time. And there is a time and a place for broad market advertising. And sometimes what can happen, the reason I bring this up, is that we become so sort of entrenched in talking to the same people that we know, that we're always asking the same people to re-engage. And this came up actually early in the session today. Instead of thinking, who are the people that we're not talking to? Who are the people who might be interested in our brand, but don't actually know that we exist? How do we get out to them and let them know who we are and how fabulous we are and why they absolutely must give us that very first chance? Because that first chance is the hardest one to get. We actually have a physiological hiccup the first time we buy something that we've never bought before. So, kind of paving the way to onboard a new audience is a terrific goal, but we have to know how much we want to spend. We have to know where we're going to get them. We have to know what kind of people hypothetically are the right people to go out to.
And perhaps that's where something like Mike's lookalike audiences could be helpful.
Well, I love that he mentioned that, because lookalike audiences, although there are some challenges right now, lookalike audiences have been a godsend for digital marketers, for digital advertising. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Well, perhaps we can talk about some of the difficulties that you hinted at, because we've been talking about data collecting and all the hard work that needs to go into it. But when you and I chatted the other day, it sounded like we're heading towards some sort of internet data apocalypse, right? Where Google Analytics turns into a zombie and tries to eat your brain. And this data is going to become impossible to find, because while we're having this conversation, half of us are going, yes, I want data, I want to understand my customer. And even producers out there are sitting going, but I want my privacy of personal information. So this whole time, there's two sides to this conversation. We're really only having one. Can you tell me about the cookieless internet, as you referred to it the other day?
So what's happening, I would encourage everyone to look into this, is Google Universal Analytics is being sunsetted. That means that all of us who are used to having like a 9-digit tracking code that starts with UA, that you dump it into a website or to various, platforms, and you just aggregate all of this data. That's actually ending in 2023. We have issues in Europe where, for instance, Google fonts have been declared anti-GDPR. Google Analytics are at risk. So the reason this is important, and actually I love so much the things that have come up in this discussion: own your data. Like, this is a thing. Get good data, whether it's your own, because like Mike's saying, you are aggregating it, you've got great scripts and systems. The very most important asset that you have are those names on a list of people who have asked you to talk to them. So permission marketing. But then for Peter, who comes in with terrific, in many cases, I'm going to assume that it is more broad market data that can help us make more informed decisions, because the days of what is cheap and easy digital marketing are disappearing. I mean, this has been like the heyday for digital marketing, and it's going away. And now we actually have to start doing things right.
And is there a deadline for that?
June 2023.
So Mike, you had a comment you wanted to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think just building on what Polly said and what Peter mentioned earlier, having a tasting room and collecting 10 names on a weekend, that's a start. There's 52 weekends in the year, and do that for 10 years and you've got a rock solid database. But once you know who you want to target, then you can also start looking for alternative sources. Now, Peter runs Intelligence. They have data. Their job is to provide data and analyze data. Looking inside Vinimark, Vinimark buys data. You can go and speak to Vinimark and they'll help you understand your data. But not everything is about the small mom and pop tasting room in a beautiful little thing. Wine in a beautiful little country setting. The wine business is big business, and a lot of brands that are in the Vinimark portfolio, but globally, are not about collecting 10 people here and 10 people there. They're about saying, I need to move 2 million cases in the next month. How am I going to do that? And every one of the most successful retailers around the world collects data. Generally, it's a strong revenue stream that they collect, collate, and sell that data so you can buy it. Sure, you need deep pockets, but you can buy it. So if you're in South Africa and your biggest client is Pick n Pay, you can buy their data and you can slice it and dice it and you can analyze it. You can speak to anyone. Smart Shopper is the single biggest data collection point in South Africa from a retail point of view, because it's people that are actively every single day they swipe their card. It's a loyalty program, and next to their name and their card number is a record of everything they've ever bought from Pick and Pay, when they bought it, what day. Are they more likely to buy wine on a Thursday or a Tuesday? Are they more likely to spend 60 or 200 Rand? Everything is there. So data is big business, and we mustn't be scared of that. And I just wanted to add that this is not a cottage industry. This is also serious business.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. So Peter, I mean, it seems like then if this has been the heyday for digital marketers getting free information from Google, so to speak, it feels like in the next couple of months, your work is going to become a lot more important, in that if you were advising a time-stressed, even whether it's big or small, a time-stressed producer wanting to give a facelift to their digital marketing, what are the first things that you would recommend offloading to a specialist?
Sorry, Jono, I've got a bit of an ESCOM problem here, but you broke up a little bit, but I think I got sort of the crux around that. Maybe for me, I think I just want to jump back to that one topic. I think we must be aware there's a massive amount of business intelligence around us the whole time. There is incredible data sources, and yes, unfortunately, sometimes you need deep pockets, and that's predominantly why I'm focusing on saying start where it's basically for free and then work yourself up, because you can buy very expensive data, but if you don't have the ability to really analyze it and look at it in a productive and sort of efficient way, you know, it's going to be a lot of revenue wasted into it. But I mean, it once again depends on smaller and bigger brands have different dynamics that they need to fulfill. Jono, if you don't mind just repeating that last section on your question that I missed, that I'm not totally blabbing on.
No. Well, I'd love to hear from both you and Polly, who both work with clients. And I think one of the issues is time constraints. To speak to Mike's point, whether it's a big business or a small business, time is always scarce. So when it comes to prioritizing the things that you should be keeping in-house, as opposed to things that you should be giving out to a specialist, what is high up on the list of tasks and functions of digital marketing that are best suited to specialists?
I'll probably have the shortest answer, so I'll go first and leave it to you to extrapolate. But what I get excited about, I'm just looking at on ads on wine.co.za. There's a lot more DTC, there's a lot more marketing managers, and I think there's a big important thing we've got to distinguish in the wine industry. Sales and marketing are very different activities, and different people should do it. We have too many sales and marketing managers. I may get slayed for saying that, but I think it's two very different disciplines. The reality is, I mean, there's a lot of our smaller businesses that the farm manager, the winemaker, and the marketer is probably the same person. So we've got to be aware of that. I just think be wary of leaving that to the least experienced, or possibly the one that's doing a lot of different admin things in the tasting room. Don't just leave it to them that it becomes a tick box that they need to do every day. I think that would be my biggest no. And I think Polly can actually color that in a lot better than I am.
Yeah, Polly, I noticed you nodding vigorously at the difference between sales and marketing.
Yeah, I know. Where's the high five emoji? I want to do all my panels with you three. This is fabulous. So I think that if there was one pat answer, like one thing to outsource, if you don't have a business background, bring in someone to get the foundation right. If you can understand, so what are your goals? What is your messaging? Who are your consumers? Then that knowledge sitting in-house with you is going to be the filter that's going to help you use whatever resources you have to the best of your ability. Don't pay to outsource tactics when you have no idea why or who or where, really just invest in good strategy. And I say this all the time. It's a real rant of mine. A good, I know consultants, are vilified, but a good agency or a good consultant Their job is actually to help you get the answers to all the questions that you don't know to ask. They're not supposed to come in and like answer the base questions that you have. They're supposed to hear what you're trying to accomplish and help you understand how you get there. So, you know what? You can go great guns with one channel. You can say, I'm only going to do email marketing. I have so many brands that do this. Fabulous. They've got a small team, but they really leaned in to email marketing, blew up the business. They're only going to do Instagram, but they're going to give it their all. Great. But all those decisions started with knowing that this was the one channel that their limited resources could do the most with.
Yes, Mike.
So just adding to what Polly said, and you asked the question at Peter, what's the one thing you would say? I would always say start with the plan. Digital marketing is a complete waste of time if you don't know what the hell you want to talk about. And then be very conscious about it, plan things out far in advance. If you're going to write a newsletter, don't jot it down on the Thursday and send it out Thursday night. A brief anecdote that might be useful here, John. In 2015, one of my wine idols from around the world came out to South Africa. His name was Bill Harlan. And he came out with his family, and they came and stayed with me at Warwick back in 2015. And at about 10 o'clock at night, we were having this wonderful dinner under the stars. And he stood up and he said, Mike, it's been a lovely evening. I have to excuse myself. It was a beautiful February night. And I said, oh, that's very sad. Where are you off to? He said, well, I've got to put the finishing touches to my newsletter. And I said, when's your newsletter going out? And he said, it's going out in July. This was a February evening. He is one of the great wine marketers of the world, and he is so conscious of fine tuning. I think they sent that around to probably 100 different commentators to get their opinion on how every word lands. And so I would urge people to think about what you're doing. Actually sit down and think, what is it that I want to communicate? And why do I want to communicate? And who do I want to listen? And who do I want to hear? And then going back to what Peter said about the difference between sales and marketing, am I telling them a story or am I asking them to do something? These are different things. So slightly long anecdote, but being conscious and planning and having a plan is everything.
Can I jump in on that really quickly? Just on the Harlan story. So I work with the design agency who is the guardian of the Harlan visual brand. And this applies to digital as well. It's the exact same thing. It's methodical, it's curated, we don't make arbitrary decisions, and we don't get enamored by shiny things and go off track because my nephew told me that I need to be on TikTok or whatever it is, and I really do want to mention that on the marketing side of things, especially when you're engaging in new marketing, there's this real endorphin rush to, I got new followers, or so-and-so followed me, or, oh, I got my, first big sale, or, oh, I have, whatever it might be, that we're so in love with the shiny parts of it. And we just really aren't interested in the boring. We're going to sit at our desk, even though we really want to be out doing the fun stuff. We're going to make the plan. I mean, I deal with it with clients all the time. Fill out the spreadsheet. We need to know what we're tracking. We need to know how we're going to get there. And so, yeah, methodical, think.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've got about 7 minutes left. So I wanted to, first of all, if there were any questions that the panel wanted to ask to each other, perhaps. But second of all, I'm just wanting to see if there are any questions from the audience so far. I'm not sure if we've got anything coming in. It's not essential, but it's always nice to have. So if you do have any questions, yes, Mike.
I have a question for Polly. Polly, what's the best digital marketing channel?
Email. Without a doubt.
Ladies and gentlemen, you just have
collect the names and email marketing, and you own it. And I don't care how much Facebook ends up in front of Congress. I don't care if Elon Musk buys Twitter. You own your email database, and more than any other single investment, that's where you put your time and money.
There was an interesting anecdote from a small sock manufacturer who will remain nameless, but he claims that his most successful email send out ever was one where he got rid of the MailChimp templates or the fancy graphic email, and it was just a little email going, hey guys, I have some stuff for you, check it out. Simple, plain text email. I wondered, Polly, where is the nexus there for being polished and professional, where sometimes being rustic and rough can be more personal? Do you have thoughts on that?
I think that's a question for Mike. I think that's a good question about those two brands. So I'm going to pass the buck on that one.
Pass the baton. What are your thoughts, Mike?
I think both are excellent. It just depends what your plan is. So if you get confused and forget what your plan is, just look over to the big whiteboard at the other end of your office, and it'll tell you because you've written it down. And then if rustic is your brand personality, then rustic it shall be. I can tell you that we have removed imagery from a lot of our wine club member communication, and it's having great results.
Amazing. It's really interesting. I suppose it's that sense that perhaps we are flooded with too much, and sometimes a really simple message is the best. Well, we don't have any, oh, we do. We have one question coming through. Let me just quickly have a look. The question is, not all brands have a tasting room. How do you recommend building your database without face-to-face? Any thoughts there?
I have a simple one. If you participate in any wine show, everybody that comes to the counter, you could ask them if they'd like to be communicated to and get their email address. Any interaction you have with anybody, anytime. And on top of that, on a Facebook or Instagram post, you could ask people to tell you that they're interested by filling in a Google form. Every single touch point with the consumer is an opportunity to hold their interest, and then perhaps potentially hold their interest forever.
Great. Yeah, I also think, that's a great excuse to actually ask someone for their email. It's obviously we've got to be aware of the fact that people don't like to share their personal information, so you've got to be quite precise on why do you ask for it. And I think in this example, it's actually almost like making it more relevant to ask for it. But yeah, I think we've got to be aware that not everyone's going to give their details to you, but at least try.
I suppose, and that's maybe beautifully tied up by what Mike said earlier about you need to know whether you're asking someone to do something or whether you're telling them a story. I mean, if you're like, give me your email address so that I can finish telling the story, it feels like there's an opportunity. It's not a request. I think maybe that's part of the answer. We do have one more question.
Wait, hold on. I want to respond to this really quickly because we have a very personal connection. I'm sitting here in this room because Jono, you and my husband made friends on Vivino. Like that was years and years and years ago. Community building can happen. It takes work, but if you don't have a tasting room and you're not manning the cellar door, great. That's when you get into these spaces and you make friends, because that's why they work. So don't be afraid to be human in our social spaces.
Absolutely. There was one other question
about TikTok. Is it damaging for a premium brand?
Yes. Mike has answered it though. Young guys drink wine, but the brand voice needs to be tailored to the audience. So Mike, are you on TikTok? Have you been doing some left-right jigs?
I'm all over TikTok. I own TikTok. No, I don't. I'm learning about TikTok. I'm definitely on it. Mike.Ratcliffe for anybody that wants to follow. It is fascinating. It's the biggest and fastest growing social channel in the world, faster now than WeChat. It's massively powerful, and it represents the future generation. I think that you have to be there. Even if you're not communicating, you have to be there learning, listening, and understanding.
Fantastic. Well, I think that it's a good time for us to wrap up. And actually your last point brings me to my own little summary of our chat, because it's been 1 hour now, and I felt like there were 8 really great points that came up. And the first one was just echoed by everybody, which was to know who you are from the get-go. Because if you know who you are, that'll help you with little things like your keywords and your audience, but it'll also help you to set a strategy. Now, strategy logically gives birth to setting goals, which is something you talked about, Polly. And those goals don't have to be massive. They can be small, they can be granular, they can be regional to within your neighborhood. But there are times where you might want to use a shotgun, which Polly talked about earlier. Just because granular has worked for a bunch of people, that doesn't mean it's not a bad idea to every now and then do broad-based marketing, especially in the area of brand awareness. And then the last 2 points were be aware of yourself and of others, which I think you both talked about. If you know who you are, that's great. But if you have no idea what your customers think of you or what you want, that's also a problem. Polly, you talked about Googling yourself. Just a little quick digital look in the mirror, which I thought was hugely helpful. And then you went on to talk about owning your data, Polly, which especially in the coming months where it becomes a lot more difficult to access everyone else's data free, the owning of your own data puts you in a stronger position than someone who hasn't bothered to go through the hard yards. And I thought at the end, I think it's counterintuitive when you're talking about fancy things like digital marketing and social media, for you and Mike to both agree that email is one of your most powerful channels. I mean, I think that's an incredible endorsement of a very simple tool that is at our fingertips. So that is my summary. Is there anything that you guys feel perhaps needed to be added in that might be helpful for the producers watching? Nothing? No? Great. Well, then it's 16:01. So I think it's time for us to wrap up. But I just want to thank you, Polly, Peter, and Mike. Your insights they've been great. They've been so useful. My mind keeps spinning about how to implement them better in the things that I do. And for those of you who are at home, who are enjoying this conversation, just bear in mind, there's a whole series of podcasts and webinars that are hosted by Vinimark. The webinars are available for viewing on the Vinimark YouTube channel, and the podcasts are available on the Vinimark podcast channel, which is on both Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, as well as on the Vinimark website under the News tab. So thanks again for joining us, and have a productive rest of the afternoon. Goodbye.